Beginning in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the U.S. has seen a rapid increase in opioid addiction and overdose deaths. Since 2015, the life expectancy for Americans has been in decline, mostly due to so-called deaths of despair, which include deaths due to suicide, alcoholism, and opiate overdose. In 2016, the opioid epidemic killed more than 42,000 people, which is more than died of AIDS in any year at the height of the AIDS crisis. Today, someone dies of an opiate overdose every 11 minutes in America. This epidemic results from changes brought about by social, political, and economic globalization. Globalization involves the proliferation of complex global linkages. It is a phenomenon which sociologist Tom Inglis has described as the conflation of global time and space, through which the world is increasingly becoming one place. The interrelated and interwoven tapestry of occurrences, which has given rise to the epidemic, may be best understood using Deleuze and Guattari's concept of the rhizome. The philosophical concept of the rhizome is modeled on the botanical rhizome, which is a multi-directional and ever-expanding mass of roots and shoots that grows out of nodes. Rhizomes are composed of dimensions which are always in motion. They are made of plateaus which have neither beginning nor end. They grow in an unpredictable manner, with any point of the rhizome being connected to any other. Here we will examine several plateaus of occurrences whose intersections have led to the opioid epidemic. This crisis has occurred against the backdrop of job losses in the manufacturing industry due to trade, automation, and outsourcing. The U.S. manufacturing industry has lost around 1/3 of its total jobs in the last 30 years, with a loss of 5.7 million jobs between the years 2000 and 2010 alone. The growing unemployment rate has corresponded with an increase in disability, pain, mental illness, addiction, and premature death. The areas of the U.S. which have been most affected by economic globalization, particularly the East Coast, Appalachia, and the Rust Belt, have exhibited higher rates of suicide and opiate overdose, particularly among poorly educated whites who have historically dominated the manufacturing industry. The opioid epidemic has come in 3 waves. The first wave, beginning in 1999, involved prescription opiates such as oxycodone and hydrocodone. A recent study by the American Medical Association found that the areas which have been hardest hit by the opioid epidemic also saw the most aggressive marketing campaign by pharmaceutical manufacturers. Opioid distributors court doctors by offering them fees in exchange for speaking, consulting, and other services. These payments encourage doctors to prescribe opiates, even in circumstances where a safer drug may be the better option. And in 2017, 1 in 12 American doctors were in receipt of payment by an opioid manufacturer. Higher prescription rates were observed among state-subsidized Medicare and Medicaid recipients, and in 2016, 1 in 3 of the program's 43.6 million beneficiaries were prescribed opiates. Multinational corporations such as Johnson & Johnson, Insys, Purdue Pharma, and their international wing Mundi Pharma International have knowingly pushed the sale of extremely dangerous drugs onto the American public, and they have even succeeded in lobbying the United States Congress to pass laws more favorable to the pharmaceutical industry. The second wave of the epidemic, beginning in 2010, saw a shift towards illegal opiates. At this time, the scope of the prescription opiate crisis was becoming apparent, which led to efforts to decrease prescriptions, which in turn made prescribed opioids harder to obtain. Those addicted turned to the cheaper and easier to obtain illegal opiate heroin. When polled, approximately 80% of heroin users admitted to using prescription opiates before having turned to heroin. The majority of heroin consumed in the U.S. is trafficked from Mexico, and this trafficking of illegal drugs has been facilitated by the liberalization of global trade. The introduction of the North American Free Trade Agreement in 1994 allowed goods and people to move more freely into the United States, but this has made policing the international flow of drugs increasingly difficult, particularly in the case of Mexico, which shares over 30 legal and many illegal border crossings with the U.S. The third wave of the epidemic, beginning in 2013, saw a sharp rise in deaths relating to heroin and powerful synthetic opioids such as fentanyl. Fentanyl is approximately 40 times stronger than heroin and is often combined with heroin to increase the heroin's potency. And it is estimated that over 40% of the 72,000 drug-related deaths in the U.S. in 2017 involved fentanyl. Fentanyl is trafficked through global supply chains, with China being the primary source of synthetic opioids which arrive into the United States. Drug traffickers have exploited the increase in global interconnectivity brought about by advances in information technology. Crypto markets found on the internet's dark web have proven to be a haven for the sale of synthetic opioids and their constituent elements. Due to the potency of fentanyl and other synthetic opioids, they are often trafficked in relatively small quantities through international mail, shipping services, and through ports of entry. The ease with which synthetic opioids move around the globe makes their sale extremely profitable and is exceedingly dangerous. The chemical components of fentanyl are also trafficked using traditional drug trafficking methods directly to Mexico from China, where they are manufactured into fentanyl and combined with heroin prior to being brought into the United States. The United States and Mexico launched the joint Merida Initiative in 2007. The Merida Initiative focuses on the disruption of organized crime, strengthening the rule of law, border security, and providing aid to impoverished communities, with a special focus on disrupting the production and distribution of heroin and fentanyl. The initiative has facilitated cooperation between the Mexican and U.S. authorities, which recently led to the capture and prosecution of several cartel leaders, including Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. The opioid crisis was declared a national public health emergency in 2017, and several states have since commenced civil litigation against pharmaceutical companies, who they claim concealed the risks of prescription opioids. The Drug Enforcement Administration has also coordinated their efforts with China, who has since banned the manufacture of several variants of fentanyl. The Support for Patients and Communities Act was signed into law in 2018. The Act improves access to drug treatment services, introduces measures to further limit international shipments of illegal drugs into the United States, and increases the penalties for pharmaceutical companies who are found to have contributed to the overprescribing of opioids. In February 2019, President Trump declared a national emergency in order to build a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. The Trump administration maintains that a wall is needed along the southern border to halt the flow of drugs, migrants, and criminals entering the U.S. from Mexico and South America. However, critics are doubtful that a wall will be effective in this regard. The causes of the opioid epidemic are multifaceted and, due to the interrelated changes brought about by globalization, cross many borders. The opioid crisis has now spread to Americans of all socioeconomic backgrounds and geographical areas. And today, 1 in every 96 Americans will die of an opioid overdose, making opioid overdose a more likely cause of death than road traffic accidents. American politicians and scientists have issued warnings to European governments and policymakers, urging them to take the necessary action to prevent a similar opioid epidemic arising in Europe. In 2017, 12 members of the U.S. Congress issued a letter to the World Health Organization, highlighting the role of Purdue Pharmaceuticals and its global subsidiary, Mundipharma International, in creating America's opioid epidemic through their aggressive and deceptive sales practices. And even though Ireland has harsher regulations for the prescription of dangerous drugs, increasing privatization and a lack of funding for the HSE may result in pharmaceutical and international companies having greater influence on the provision of healthcare in Ireland. Experts warn that Europe may be catching up with the U.S., as the level of opioid abuse in Europe is now comparable to that of America in the early 2000s. Whereas heroin addiction in Ireland is concentrated in particular areas and socioeconomic groups, addiction to prescription painkillers has the potential to affect a wider variety of people. And it is sincerely hoped that Europe will avoid a similar crisis, having taken lessons from America's devastating mistake.